Welcome in to the Ultimate Tennessee Podcast. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. The Tennessee Volunteers are also back in the Super Regional. It's Tennessee and Notre Dame this weekend in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. As always, I'm Will Bowling. That is the well-traveled Lucas Panzica, who is back with us here this week. Lucas, welcome back to the country. And the Vols have really just kind of done what they do while you've been gone. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. It's great to be back. I might be the first person in human history to be in the Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, taking in a Serie A Brazilian league game while frantically checking for a Tennessee baseball score. I'm willing to say, I was talking to Sean Barrows, Tennessee's SID, the other day, and I was telling him this. I'm willing to say that I'm the first person in human history to ever do that. It's good to be back. It seems like it was a chaotic regional weekend, somehow even more so than last year with the Grand Slam against Wright State. But the drama sort of ended there, right? After that Grand Slam walk-off win last year for Tennessee, it seemed like the drama was start to finish for Tennessee in this year's edition of the regional.
It was. I feel the same way, by the way, too, because when I was in Puerto Rico broadcasting there, I thought at the time, I'm the only person on the island of Puerto Rico that is checking a Tennessee baseball score. I think it was Auburn maybe at that point or Alabama. It was like, I am 100% the only person that cares about what Tennessee baseball is doing. Actually, maybe not, because Jarrell Ortega is from Puerto Rico, so I may be off base there.
Now, that was during the SEC championship game when I was at that game in Rio, and I was not successful in getting enough service or internet to find the score of that game. Had to find it basically the next morning, but that was also a Tennessee win and an SEC title.
That's right. So on today's show, we dive a little bit into Notre Dame, what they do well. I think there's one matchup that specifically Tennessee has a clear advantage in against Notre Dame. And at this point, everybody's good. So everybody's going to rank in the top 10, top 15 and something. And Notre Dame certainly has some strengths. They pitch very, very well. But we get into that matchup here today. A little bit of Knoxville Regional recap. Predictions as well here at the end of the show for the series against Notre Dame. But I guess I should say off the top that there's really, again, not much football to discuss, not a ton of basketball to discuss either, other than some pretty big commitments over the past couple of weeks. But, it's kind of all baseball right now for Tennessee, and it's making the football offseason go by a lot faster than it used to.
Yeah, no doubt. My goodness, what a luxury this has been. And let's say Tennessee moves past the Super Regional into the College World Series. That buys you a couple more weeks before you really pivot all your attention to football. Next thing you know, you're a month away from SEC media days, and then 2 months away from week one. So it's hard to believe. I did some counting today, and we're 12 weeks out from week one of the college football season. Hard to believe. Let's hope that the next time that we really start talking about the start of college football season will be because we're post-College World Series, which will mean we're like 8-9 weeks away.
It's not bad. It's a good way to live. It's like when the Predators run to the Stanley Cup final gave us a lot more to talk about and a lot more to do in the football offseason, because obviously this part of the country, it's always about how do you fill dead time from football. But Tennessee baseball has been a kind of a gift to us, not just in the sports talk radio world, but I think just any Tennessee fan. No doubt about it. So the Knoxville Regional was interesting. I thought it was kind of tame for Tennessee, given the drama that they've had. And, you only get one guy being flipped off in the outfield is kind of the, what did Tennessee do this week storyline out of this weekend. But let's start with the Evan Russell stuff, because I think you and I are probably going to have different perspectives on this just as broadcasters than probably a lot of Tennessee fans are. And off the top, I mean, there's no libel suit that's going to happen here. Like there's nothing lawfully that Tennessee could, or even Evan Russell could say to an ESPN announcer falling for a fake tweet and saying that the entire team was going to have to be tested for PEDs because Evan Russell failed a drug test. There's no damages that it's not going to hurt his draft stock. It's not going to give him a lesser signing bonus because a broadcaster wrongfully said that he might be taking PEDs. I think people need to take a deep breath about this.
I fell for a fake tweet a few weeks ago that Tyrann Mathieu was signed by, I think, the New Orleans Saints. I think that's what it was. No, because he did sign with the Saints. It was the Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens signed Tyrann Mathieu. I fell for it. I got. I had to come on and basically apologize for it and admit
Consider
my
myself
shame.
a man of faith.
Yes.
There's a deep drive in the left by Jordan Beck.
Jordan Beck,
Yeah.
by Evan Russell. I did not get sued by neither Matthew nor the Baltimore Ravens, and neither will this ESPN broadcaster, whose name I've already Eklund, right? Was
something
the
like
name
that.
of the broadcaster, who's I've already
probably should
basically forgotten. So yes, I like to think that Tennessee's fan base has basically forgotten about it too. But I'm sure Mr. Eklund, which I think is his name, if he did not know much about the Tennessee fan base before that, he definitely does now.
No doubt. I mean, and look, this is kind of where I fall on this too, is that these things do happen. They shouldn't happen, but in the world of fake tweets, I actually got duped on a fake tweet about a month ago when DeAndre Hopkins got suspended. Somebody said that it was for ingesting deer tranquilizer. And I read that to Brent Doherty during 3HL thinking like, oh my gosh, like, are you kidding me? And then I realized that was, I think, from Dodgeball. I'm pretty sure.
Were you sued by DeAndre Hopkins?
I was not. Have not heard anything. My lawyers have kept me apprised of the situation. No, but look, I mean, this is another thing too that people I think need to understand about the broadcast industry and about ESPN broadcasters. The amount of full-time ESPN broadcasters who you can say definitively represent the network and represent ESPN is maybe, what would you say, like 10 to 15%?
Especially
of the people that actually call games on ESPN,
especially college baseball.
Yeah. Like, this is not something that represents, the company of ESPN. And I get that you're a representative for whoever you work for at the time, but it would be different if this was Tom Hart, or if this was Kyle Peterson, or if this was Chris Burke, someone that is a full-time, maybe not full-time, I don't know, but a contracted employee that is an expert that is going to call the College World Series, the SEC championship. This is a guy that calls games part-time and probably has another job, right? So I think the burden of I don't know, a blame that you can place on somebody like that is a little bit smaller for someone that isn't full-time, that isn't in the sport all the time. Now, is it an inexcusable mistake? Absolutely. You can't do it. You have to confirm these things before you say them. But in the world of Twitter and the world of Arkansas fans posing as reporters and Tennessee fans, I just think this is something that we have to just accept as kind of a part of life.
And no, it was not an example of ESPN having it out for Tennessee, a theory that I have never understood whatsoever. All classic. Everybody's trying to take down the Vols. Like, now, Vols have done a good enough job as an athletics program over the last 15 years of doing that to themselves. Nobody else is trying to do that, especially not a television network.
No doubt. So, good regional. Tennessee, now 3 times this year, they've come from behind after trailing in the 8th. And 2 of those times came in consecutive games against Georgia Tech and against Campbell as well in the other regional game. And then the other one was Baylor, another Chase Dolander start at the beginning of the season where Tennessee was down 4-0 in the first, came back and dominated that game out in Houston and Minute Maid Park. But I think that this is a really interesting matchup, Lucas, against Notre Dame, because when you look at what they do well, they pitch really, really well. Don't score a lot of runs. Only had 11 runs over the last 3 games in the Statesboro Regional and Georgia Southern. I think what this comes down to is, can Notre Dame beat Tennessee twice in a row? Because I don't see Notre Dame beating Chase Dolander in game 1, and I don't see Tennessee losing 2 games in a row, which means that you would put them in Omaha at this point, because Tennessee only has 2 times this season where they've lost twice in a row, games 1 and 2 against Kentucky, and then the Tennessee Tech game coming from Smoky Stadium, and then the Friday night game against Alabama. Tennessee's probably going to have to lose twice in a row to not win a national championship this year. And at this point, I still just don't see that happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're the overwhelming favorite, obviously. And really, I don't think the regional could have worked out any better for Tennessee in that respect, in that they had to overcome some tough spots against some pesky opponents. I feel like Notre Dame, though that's obviously not a small mid-major name like Campbell, it still, I think, qualifies as one of those pesky opponents that pitches very, very well, a low-scoring team that wants to beat you, 3-1, something along those lines. They don't want to get into a shootout. But Tennessee had to overcome some tough spots against these opponents in the Knoxville Regional. Like you said, twice faced their second largest deficit of the season, only 4 against Campbell and Tech. And with Tech, we're talking about facing a critical loss dead in the eyes in a regional final in the 9th inning. And we already knew this team kind of had that killer instinct, but to be able to have all those situations thrown at them in a regional, and to be able to overcome them emphatically should just give them more confidence going into this weekend, as opposed to maybe cruising into the super regional without having had to go through any controversy. It's like their eyes light up when they're facing a rare deficit in a critical spot late in the game. So it's a good quality for a team to have. And the only thing we haven't seen this team overcome is a 5+ run deficit, because they haven't really faced that all year long. And history, at least this season, suggests that Notre Dame will not be the one to pose that to Tennessee. So Tennessee's in a great spot, and it really would take a big collapse this weekend to get to Omaha. Like I said, we would have to lose game 1 for that to happen, but it's college baseball. Much, much stranger things have happened.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think the biggest advantage that Tennessee has over Notre Dame is just the amount of baseball that they've played this season. Notre Dame has as many games played as Tennessee has wins. And that's a huge advantage also, because Notre Dame has not played in an atmosphere like Lindsey Nelson Stadium probably all season. They did sweep Florida State in Tallahassee. It's the first time that they've done that in program history. But when you look at the numbers in totality over the course of the entire season, Notre Dame ranks 107th in college baseball in hits, 119th in doubles, 114th in triples, and 78th with 68 home runs. But they've played 52 games. So you kind of have to look at the per game stats in order to get the full story of what Notre Dame has done this year. Tennessee leads the country in home runs per game. Notre Dame is 59th. Tennessee is 10th in the country in doubles per game. Notre Dame is 89th. Tennessee is 4th in the country in runs per game. Notre Dame is 41st with 7.7 runs per game. Here's the biggest two things I think Tennessee has going for it this weekend. A, Notre Dame has not played in a raucous environment like Lindsey Nelson Stadium is going to be. If you saw how dead Miami was in their regional, you saw what ACC baseball has looked like at times at different places that are still premier programs in that conference. But Tennessee's played more baseball. They've played a lot more games. They've been able to hit a lot more home runs. Their pitching is still better. They have the best ERA in the country. Notre Dame's is 7th at 3.82. I just think that Notre Dame hasn't seen a challenge like Tennessee, and the fact that this team is so much more experienced at this point, it might end up being the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Notre Dame is an older team. Tony Vitello's talked a lot about that. You're probably not going to do much this time of year if you don't have some older guys on your roster. Both of these teams have older guys on their roster. But I always get confused, Will, really in almost any scenario, but especially with this Tennessee team, when I see opponents like Notre Dame left fielder Ryan Cole and what he said earlier this week in front of reporters, quote, "I couldn't tell you exactly what they see, but if I were them, I'd be a little scared. I think we're a very dangerous team." I don't understand this from opponents going up against an overwhelming favorite like
smart.
Tennessee. It's a zero-sum game for you. I mean, like, honestly, like, what can you gain from that? There is nothing you could potentially gain from that. All you are doing is somehow dangling more bait for Tennessee to latch onto and to want even more reason to beat you 20-0, because that's what Tennessee wants to do. That sort of Notre Dame insider website with the long article previewing the series said just that. Tennessee wants to beat you 40-0. If it's 8-0 in the 8th inning, they're not done. They're pissed off that they didn't make it 9 or 10-0. So this to me is just going to increase the environment at Lindsey Nelson Stadium. I think Tennessee fans in general have some sort of hatred for Notre Dame. It feels like maybe to do with football, and it's been a very, to call it a rivalry would be completely, just wrong. But the few times Tennessee and Notre Dame football have played, they've been really contentious games. Tennessee's lost to Notre Dame a few times. You had the comeback in the early 90s with Johnny Majors up in South Bend. I don't know. I feel like there's something to that with Tennessee fans when they look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And I think there's going to be a lot of juice in that building. And Notre Dame has the experience to overcome it, but I just don't think they have the bats to overcome it, Will. I really don't. I mean, as we talk about, the biggest overwhelming matchup Tennessee has on Notre Dame, you just laid off some stats. This team also leads the country in runs scored all year long. I'm a lot more focused on Tennessee's bats than I am Tennessee's pitching going into this matchup, because Notre Dame wants to keep this thing low scoring. They don't want to get into a 9-6 shootout like the Georgia Tech game. This team totaled 11 runs in 3 games in the Statesboro Regional. If Tennessee's bats get hot at any point this weekend and that confidence starts to kind of stack on top of itself, the thing's going to be over. So for me, I understand the pitching is important for Tennessee to keep Notre Dame low scoring. But if Tennessee gets hot at any point in game 1, then I think this thing is over pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the equalizer Notre Dame also has is they don't make a lot of errors.
Yeah.
One of the best fielding teams in the country, a really well-coached team, a guy that used to be at UNC Greensboro, who played Tony Vitello in Tennessee when he was there, and Link Jarrett, who said this past week as well, I think Tennessee has established themselves as the best number one team in any college sport this year that I've followed. Tennessee fans are going to be attracted to, what their outfielder said about, that they should be scared. And Link Jarrett even said later on in the same interview, he said, I think some of their home run numbers are a product of their small ballpark. And I think we can make some noise there playing in similar dimensions. People are going to attract to the negative, but that's about as strong of a positive as you could possibly say, saying that they're the best number one team in any college sport this year. Meanwhile, Oklahoma softball is just absolutely run-ruling teams left and right in the Women's College World Series. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement. So I think Notre Dame and Tennessee, you mentioned the tradition and kind of a little bit of a rivalry through football. I just think Tennessee is attracted to other traditional fan bases.
Yes. Yeah, that's a better way to put it for sure. Yeah.
I think that's the case with Oklahoma when those guys came to Tennessee. I think BYU, that's why that matchup made so much sense. Virginia Tech, maybe not as much of a traditional power athletically, but regionally another team that Tennessee kind of attracts to. And UCLA is the other big one. I know on your Inside Zone podcast, you talk with Doug Matthews about that, about how UCLA was a big team to play, and he and Coach Majors took Tennessee out to California to play in the Rose Bowl against UCLA and all those things. But Notre Dame is certainly one of those matchups, which, fun fact, I was at one of those Tennessee-Notre Dame games in South Bend, and without question, I tell people this all the time, the Notre Dame fans that I met there were the nicest fans I have ever met as an away fan at a football game. Not even close.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we would park our car and they would shake our hand and say, like, hope you enjoy your visit at Notre Dame. And like, everyone was just like, oh, hey, how are you? Welcome to Notre Dame. Welcome. I'm like, no, hate me. Like, why are you being nice to me? I don't want you to be nice to me. Like, I was sick, so I didn't really know the difference, but it was such a jarring idea that I was not used to as someone that's been to so many SEC stadiums.
Yeah, Notre Dame is one of those environments, at least in football, that it's considered one of the great college football environments in the country.
It was cool.
Not because it's a raucous, hostile environment, but because of the history and touchdown Jesus and the striped end zones and the stadium itself. There's so much tradition and pageantry there. That's why it's considered one of the best environments in college football, not because you're going to get your head cut off as an opposing player in there. Whereas when you talk about Knoxville, it's a little bit different. I did a rant today on the Buck Rising show about this, with the Warriors crying about the Celtics, chanting F-bombs at Draymond Green in front of children. I was like, the children were probably the ones starting those chants.
Yeah, welcome to sports.
Yeah.
Right.
Who has a more hostile fan environment, Boston or Golden State? Nothing against Golden State fans. They create a great environment at Oracle Arena, but it's Boston because of stuff like that. Where do players want to play less? They'd probably rather play in Oracle Arena. Yeah. Where does a college baseball player want to play? Would he rather play in South Bend, or would he rather play in Lindsey Nelson Stadium? The answer is not Knoxville. So I've had this rant before on here too, that I want you as a fan, as a player, as a coach, to despise, to dread coming to my place. And I imagine that's kind of what's going through the minds of a lot of Notre Dame fans that maybe are having second thoughts about making the trip down to Knoxville because they don't need berate second into that place because they're wearing a Notre Dame shirt. And that's just what you're going to get as a player, as a coach, as a fan of Notre Dame. And they know that. So like we said plenty of times, they're experienced. I don't think that they're going to absolutely crumble, but it's certainly not going to be something that they've seen all season.
So the question that I have now, and I think there's a couple of good answers here, is who gets the ball for Tennessee in game one? Because starting the Knoxville Regional, Blade Tidwell was pretty much perfect in that game, albeit against Alabama State. He's a guy that's used to throwing to begin a regional, to begin a super regional. He's been there before for Tennessee, but he's not Tennessee's best pitcher right now. Chase Dolander all season, he's the SEC Pitcher of the Year for a reason. His .71 walks and hits per innings pitch is the lowest in college baseball entering the postseason. I think either way, it's a good call. I'm riding with Chase Dolander and the guy that's gotten you to this point and trusting the experience of Blade Tidwell in game two. And then it's whoever is available in that third game if you get there. You have Drew Beam. Chase Burns out of the bullpen has been really, really good when he doesn't have to hold back with his stuff at all. Ben Joyce, Redmond Walsh, Kirby Kell has been huge. Will Mabry was the MVP of Tennessee's comeback win against Georgia Tech, holding that lead where it was. That's what other teams just don't have. is the depth of a Will Mabry. Will Mabry is a Saturday night starter for a lot of really, really good college baseball teams. He's Tennessee's fourth option out of the bullpen. Other teams just don't have that at this point in the year.
Yeah, I think you're getting Drew Beam on Sunday if the series does go 3 games. But I'm with you. You know, you've talked about how critical that game 1 is, and Notre Dame's bats, how much harder of a task it'll be to score enough runs to win back-to-back games to extend that series. If Notre Dame does drop game 1, throw out your best in game 1 in Chase Dollander and take that game, make them beat you back-to-back, something that hasn't happened all year long. Tennessee's lost 3 games and Lindsey Nelson Stadium throughout the course of this 2022 season. So I agree with you. I think it's Dollander game 1. I think that's the correct decision. And again, if Tennessee gets hot offensively, I don't think this thing's going to Sunday.
I agree. I think you had the perfect atmosphere for Tennessee to lose a college baseball game on Sunday night. Unearned runs. Drew Beam pitched well, but the inning continues after a bad throw from Cortland Lawson that gets by Luke Lipsius on a play that he's dug out plenty of times, but not the best throw from a really good defensive shortstop as well in Cortland Lawson. That continued that inning, and then Georgia Tech hits the 2-run bomb, and just like that, it's 4-0, and the inning should have been over at 0-0. And then Tennessee was leaving a ton of guys on base. I mean, they were 2 for 15 at one point with runners in scoring position, and they finished 5 of their last 10 with runners in scoring position. So even when it's not Tennessee's night, they still find a way to make it their night. We saw that in the semifinals of the SEC tournament against Kentucky, a game that's tied going into the 8th inning. Tennessee wins by 10. So I don't see anybody coming in and beating this team in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. I think Omaha is going to be a different challenge and a different conversation that we'll have next week if Tennessee gets to that point. And I think Tennessee's going to lose a game in the postseason. They're not going to sweep everybody. They're not going to finish on a, 16-game winning streak or 17-game winning streak is what it would take if they sweep this weekend and then win all their games in Omaha. So, this team's going to trip up. It might be this weekend with how well Notre Dame pitches and with the ERA that they have coming into this thing. But it's not a program that's been there very often. They're going to back-to-back supers for the first time in program history. That, to me, Lucas, I don't know if there is like a set equation for what would worry you for a program coming into Knoxville, but I would rather play a team that's a little bit better, that has less experience at this stage than like another LSU that's been there, that is maybe down a little bit, but has the experience at games like this. I don't see Notre Dame as a program that has the tradition or the history or the experience at this stage in order to really scare Tennessee in this atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have the experience. I just don't think they have the firepower. One reason why they could match up well, you mentioned the pitching. I mean, that duo of John Bertrand and Austin Wright has been really, really good for them all season. Bertrand 9-2 this season, allowed just 1 run in over 7 innings against Texas Tech in that regional final. That's the reason that they're here for back-to-back years, fighting for a spot in Omaha. I think it would only be Notre Dame's 3rd ever appearance at the College World Series. It means everything to them. I mean, Link Jarrett said those words earlier this week. This is everything for them to make that type of history with this program. But here they are facing their biggest challenge of the year so far, and the nation's leader in home runs and runs scored. And just that constant challenge of having to keep Tennessee quiet offensively over the course of an entire weekend, I just don't know that it's something Notre Dame can match offensively. And we could be proven wrong. Certainly, I don't know how many times we've thrown out the stat. The 1 seed hasn't won the national title in this sport since 1999. So at some point, maybe something's got to give. I just don't know that it's this weekend when you look at how these teams stack up offensively. When you look at the pitching, Notre Dame matches up decently. When you look at the hitting, not so much. And then another thing that we've talked about with Tennessee, Notre Dame is not particularly elite at this, but as far as stealing bases, that is something Tennessee has struggled a bit with this season as far as throwing guys out. But again, that's hard to buy into when you look back at the Vanderbilt series when we thought that could really be a point of emphasis with Vandy being one of the best at stealing bases in the country. Enrique Bradfield, in my mind, unquestionably the best base runner in baseball this year. That didn't even play a factor at Hawkins Field. Tennessee got a sweep in very convincing fashion. So to me, it's hard to pinpoint really where, unless things totally collapse for Tennessee, where Notre Dame can find enough advantages to win 2 out of 3.
All right. So you have Tennessee winning 2?
Yeah, I've got Friday and Saturday. Tennessee, okay. I agree with you. Tennessee's not going to sweep their way to a national title. They're going to drop a couple at some point. I don't think it's this weekend.
I'm with you. I think they're going to make a sweat on one of these two nights, probably on Saturday. If Blade Tidwell isn't quite as sharp as he was against Alabama State, because that's going to be tough to be as good as he was last Friday. But I think Tennessee dominates game one. I don't think Notre Dame is going to be able to touch Chase Dolander the first time that they've ever seen him, which is another big advantage that is a thing in baseball. The first time you've ever seen a pitcher, it's hard to adjust and to figure out until the second or third time through the order what that guy is doing and how he is trying to get you off balance. So Tennessee's going to trail at some point. I think it's going to be a little bit dicey at one point in game two, but I still got Tennessee winning comfortably in game one, and grinding out a result on Saturday as well. All right, so Tennessee, Notre Dame this weekend, Friday night on the Zone, all weekend on the Zone too. This is a thing that we love, that we have the dulcet tones of one John Wilkerson that are on the Zone as our Vol Network affiliation gives us. So exciting for the people. John's as good of a person in this business as I have ever met. Do you know John at all?
Very little. I don't think I know him as well as you do.
Sure.
I mean, while we're shamelessly plugging, though, I will have him on. I know you and I are both going to be on the air this weekend. I'll be doing Coach Doug Matthews' show Saturday morning, talking college football, but we will have a segment late in those 2 hours to 11 a.m. with Wilkerson, leading up to that second game of the Super Regional. So that'll be interesting to hear from him. And then I know you'll be talking all things Tennessee baseball Sunday morning as well on the Zone.
I love it. Yeah, I'll have Alan Cockrell on Big Orange Sunday morning on the Zone, former New York Yankee, former Vol, of course, New York Yankees pitching coach. So looking forward to that for sure. All right, anything on the way out that we missed? Do you have any closing thoughts, any food that you ate in Brazil that was particularly good? I'm here for any of it.
Yeah, we'll be here too long if I do that. So no, not exactly. We'll see what happens in Knoxville this weekend.
And we'll be back at it again, back on our normal schedule. We've had our summer break for the Ultimate Tennessee podcast, but we are back at it every week. We've got football news for you as it happens. We've got football previews coming up over the next few weeks. Football not that far away. Super Regionals this weekend. Omaha the week after that. Lots to discuss. Hit the subscribe button. We're with you here every single week on the 104.5 The Zone Podcast Network. For Lucas Panzica, I'm Will Bowling. Hit subscribe to the Ultimate Tennessee podcast. We'll see you next week.